Alrighty. It looks like okay. So we are live as we speak. We will start the proceedings right now. It's 10:01 Eastern Standard Time. Good morning, everybody. This is Dr. Manish Madan, Professor of Criminal Justice and co-founder for Global Indian Progressive Alliance. We are proud to host this press conference in light of the Farmers Bill, and we do have a host of organizations today joining us for this event. Just a quick background here. In September 2020, the Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, who have a majority in the Indian Parliament, passed three farm laws: the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Act, the Farmers Agreement of Price Assurance and Farm Services Act, and the Essential Commodities Amendment Act. The three farm bills were passed into law in Parliament by a process that not only lacked legislative competence, but also lacked the rigor of a democratic process representative of a participative and parliamentary democracy. Inevitably, the country has witnessed an unprecedented standoff between farmers, civil society, and the ruling government. While the government is adamant on calling these laws as pro farmers, the farmers across the country have claimed that these laws undercut their interests, a view that many scholars and public intellectuals, social intellectuals have endorsed as well. As member of the global Indian diaspora community, represented by more than a dozen organizations from across the globe, we have invited you to this press conference where we are expressing our unwavering solidarity with the farmers in India, with a call for the repeal of farmers' laws and an ask for shared governance in reformulating such laws. This program will include a keynote speaker, who I will introduce in next minute, followed by individual group statements, which will further be followed by Q&A from the members of press. And we do want to acknowledge our friends from the press here. We appreciate your joining us in this conference here. So at this point, I'll be introducing our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker is a very renowned academician, Dr. Amrijit Singh. He is the Langston Hughes Professor Emeritus of English and African American Studies at Ohio University and has served as the senior editor for the Multi-Ethnic Literature of the Americas series from Rutgers University Press. Currently, he is a visiting fellow at the South Asian Institute, the University of Texas, Austin. Before joining Ohio University in 2006, he taught for 20 years at Rhode Island College, where he was named the Mary Tucker Thorpe Professor of Arts and Sciences in 1991-92. At Rhode Island College, he also received the 2003 Alumni Association's Distinguished Faculty Award. Dr. Singh has held visiting positions at Wesleyan University, New York University, College of Holy Cross, and University of California, UC Berkeley. So as we know, an internationally known literary critic and scholar, Dr. Singh has lectured and or taught widely at many universities in Europe, Asia, Africa, and North America. In 2002, he was also a senior Fulbright professor at the JFK Institute of North American Studies. He has been recipient of many prestigious fellowships, including the Fulbright Doctoral Fellowship, Ford Foundation Ethnic Studies, Rockefeller Foundation Residency Fellowship in Bellugo, Italy, and many more, to name a lot. He was originally born in Rawalpindi in 1945, and Dr. Singh grew up in Ambala Cantonment, India, where his father was a professor as well of literature at a local college. So at this point, I will be we're pleased to have him on board and we appreciate and thank him for spending his time and giving us a keynote opening remarks on the current situation in India. And I will turn it over to Dr. Singh.
Thank you, Manish. I'm happy to join all of you and people who have gathered as part of the audience and the media. I, as you can tell from the very generous introduction from Manish, I'm, of course, a very proud Indian and a very proud South Asian. But I'm trained in American studies. That's my primary field. Of course, I always like to remind friends in India and here that people in the diaspora, we uh, kind of bear a double cross. We have to worry about where we are, and we know how concerned we were about the election that got over in November. But we cannot abandon our concerns and our anxieties about what's going on in India. So I'm going to begin with a kind of unconventional thank you to President Trump. That might shock you. What has he to do with the farmers' protests around the capital of India? I think what I mean is that in 2020, Mr. Trump got many more votes than he did in 2016. 2016, one could understand that people were tired of run of the mill politicians, and they thought that a guy who bragged about being the most successful businessman, and he continues to brag as the best president in American history ever, that he would bring a different way of doing things. But he got 63 million votes in 2016. He got 74 million votes in 2020. A huge number more than what he got. That 74 million people were willing to take a chance on him after watching him do all these shenanigans and horrible things. Now, this, of course, the government in New Delhi, especially the PM, they get compared with Trump. Yeah, what is this noise?
I have a request. People who are not on the as a panelist, please, everyone, please mute their microphones.
Yeah, you should be able to mute them. But there's a regular talk going on in the background.
All right, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So, but I'm not interested in pursuing a comparison between Mr. Trump and Mr. Modi. What I want to say is that Trump has reminded us that there's always a history that leads to the empowerment of someone like Trump. So in India, I think what we are dealing with, the latest episode being the farmers' protest, at least since 2019, although some of it started in 2014, Modi too has been much harsher on civil rights, and especially the targeting of Muslims since 2019 than it was in the Modi one. So when we have people elected to these powerful positions, we have to look at the reasons for the huge support that they get there. So I just want you to keep in mind, we'll return to it towards the end of my remarks. I just want to give a little background of how things have reached where they are. There's a lot of mention of, and even some, interpretation that this is primarily a problem of Punjab and Haryana, that other states are not involved. So let's break it down a bit. First of all, Punjab has been known as the breadbasket of India for a very long time. We have to go back to the 60s when we had serious food shortages. I was a young lecturer at Delhi University when Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri asked us to skip a meal every week and told people in the south to eat more wheat and people in the north to eat more rice, because even those regional shortages, could be handled through those kinds of devices, and we all followed those ideas. But we had the Green Revolution, and we have placed a lot of pressure on the land and the water resources, particularly in the Punjab, to a much lesser extent in Haryana and elsewhere. We persuaded, coerced the farmers in Punjab to start growing paddy. That was not something that was associated with Punjab at all. It was mostly a function of the Northeast, and also sugarcane, which have dried up the water resources of Punjab. Also, because the Green Revolution involved heavy dependence upon fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, the toxicity of the land in Punjab is an issue that we will have to deal with. But let's be clear, this is not a movement of the Punjab. It is not a movement of the Sikhs. It's not a movement of Haryana and Punjab. The the consequences uh, of lack of policy, lack of direction, and mismanagement has caused problems all over. To give you the most, uh, you know, shocking example, and I didn't realize until I started researching it carefully yesterday. 300,000 farmers have committed suicide in India. 300,000 since 1995. So just as American racism and white supremacy have a long history before Trump, they make someone like Trump possible as the president of the country. Similarly, the neglect of agriculture and the farmers who have been invested in it over decades is a major problem. Now, I'm looking at the fountainhead of knowledge, Wikipedia, and it lists uh, several reasons. Failure of crops is the biggest reason. Uh, chit funds, family problems, marriage of daughters. I'm just reading some of them, but this is almost in the order in terms of the percentages. And then debt burden. So in Maharashtra and in southern states where the suicides are much heavier, also Chhattisgarh, the former suicide have to do with all kinds of uh, you know loans that were given to them, which were scams, almost like what happened here before 2008, the Great Recession. So that is an amazing thing. So we should remember that this thing has been growing for a long time. And either it has not been addressed, or it has been inadequately addressed, or it has been very badly addressed. And the difference here now is between what's going on now is really what the Delhi duo are capable of. They are so invested in making this a rule of the corporate world, and it doesn't matter what cost it bears. I mean, look at what how they dealt with the migrants. They were a lot, they were forced to walk hundreds of miles, and when they got trains, they were forced to pay exorbitant fares, and hundreds, thousands of them died. And the prime minister made several speeches that he did not even mention them once. He was more focused on thalis and diyas and all the other wonderful solutions for the COVID crisis. So, so I want to, because I know my time is limited. So I want to kind of get to one more point that I get from the prism of being a South Asian, but who has developed a prism of looking at things. I'm not saying that's the only way. I'm not saying that's the best way of looking through my immersion in African American history and African American studies, which is my primary area. I mean, I think about 1852, Frederick Douglass' speech, when he was asked to speak on July 4th. And he has, as you can Google it, what is July 4th to the Negro? And he just lashed out at the total irrelevance of this. So if you think about migrants, you think about farmers who are going to be reduced to tenant farming, it's very clear what it will come to. You can see that the relationship of the individual, and especially people from working class, poor people is a pretty desultory one. It's a alienating one. It's not something that welcomes you into the community of citizenship. Citizenship is very important, and of course for Dalits and Muslims, things have been worse. And a lot of us believe that Christians and Sikhs are next on the list of minorities that will be targeted. So finally, I want to say that in the midst of all this uh, depressing stuff, frankly, there is something very powerful that has emerged. After all the things, draconian things that the current government, the Modi 2, has done, CA, NRC, the whole Ayodhya chapter, how the Supreme Court handled it, and then of course triple talaq that was not did not involve the Supreme Court, and what happened in Kashmir, all those things. This movement for farmers movement, and it is a movement. It is a movement. It has the potential. It has the capacity to shake up this idea of the invincibility of the Modi power structure. So I think we can expect good things to come out. A lot of people in India, a lot of people around the world, every effort has been made to divide this movement. Every effort has been made to destroy this movement, but it has shown a resilience that gives us hope. That's our hope. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Dr. Singh, for those wonderful remarks and enlightening us on several issues with several prisms that, as you spoke about. I do want to reinforce that this is not just a US-led coalition that is doing this press conference and coming in solidarity with our farmers in India and with the civil society. This is a coalition that is led by more than a dozen organizations spread across the world, and I'll just read the names as well. International Solidarity for Academic Freedom in SAF, Hindus for Human Rights, Boston South Asian Coalition, the Humanism Project from Australia, Young India from Washington, D.C., United States, Coalition Against Fascism in India, Ambedkar Study King Circle, Foundation The London Story, which is a pan-EU group, Friends of India from Texas, Voices Against Fascism in India, Student Against Hindutva Ideology, and Global Indian Progressive Alliance. So you can see that this is a broad coalition that has come out in solidarity with our civil society and giving voice to the voiceless and talking about the atrocities that is happening against the parliamentary procedures and against the will of the people that the law is being claimed to serve on. So at this point, I would like to transition to a short video and after that, we will transition to individual statements. So allow me to do that as we speak. This is one of the busiest highways. It's been blocked for weeks. Tens of thousands of farmers from the northern states of India have marched to the capital city to protest farming reforms. They've covered. This is one of the busiest highways leading to Delhi. It's been blocked for weeks. Tens of thousands of farmers from the northern states of India have marched to the capital city to protest farming reforms. They've covered at least 5 major highways around the city. The police met them with tear gas and water cannons, but they made it through and have now set up camp in and around Delhi.
अपना धरना शांतिपूर्वक करना हमारे 6 महीने लगो साल लगो हमने कोई दिक्कत नहीं है
ये कल को हमको भेज देते हैं तो हम कल को चले जाएंगे हम लंबे प्रोग्राम आप देखो ट्रालियां पर छतें डाली हुई है.
This is all happening because Prime Minister Modi's government has passed new farming laws that will change how the agricultural industry has worked for decades. And in a country of 1.4 billion people, where agricultural workers make up half of the labor force, the repercussions of those laws could be devastating. In the 1960s, India, a recently independent country, was struggling to produce enough food for its citizens. A string of droughts made things worse, causing devastating famines. So the government stepped in to modernize farming and increase the food supply in what was called the Green Revolution. They brought in U.S. advisors to help boost the production of rice and wheat. Together, they ended up overusing chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and irrigation, causing large plots of land to become infertile. Many crops suffered. Some nearly disappeared. But rice and wheat production soared. And soon, India went from having a food crisis to having a food surplus. It was in this context that India also developed a nationwide food marketing system to ensure fair prices. It's a complex system, and it differs from state to state, but here's one way to understand it. It starts with farmers bringing their crops here, to wholesale markets locally known as mundis. The farmers then sell those crops to traders through open auctions with transparent pricing. Prices can also be informed by the minimum support price, or MSP, a government price for crops like rice, cotton, wheat. The government only buys a couple of crops at these prices in certain states, but those prices can still serve as a benchmark. The crops then go to secondary market or are stored by the buyers before they are sent out for future sales. It's not a perfect system, though.
Local traders do end up colluding with each other. The auctions actually are not competitive bidding.
But for the most part, the system works on a large scale because there's oversight that aims to protect farmers by giving them market standards.
They've been designed keeping in mind the fact that farmers are the weakest link and they can be exploited in numerous ways.
Over the years, state reforms have gradually redefined and regulated markets in different ways across India. In Punjab and Haryana, for example, they have become a vital part of the industry, and farmers here have the highest incomes in the country. But in the state of Bihar, markets eliminated in 2006, and the farmers here are still ranked the poorest in India by income. And all of this is happening while there's a bigger farming crisis. The money in farming is disappearing. Since the days of the Green Revolution, agriculture has come from accounting for nearly 50% of the economy to just 15%, meaning millions of farmers already have trouble making ends meet in this shrinking economy. More than half of India's farming households are in debt, and this debt has contributed to a suicide crisis. In the last 2 years, more than 20,000 farmers have died by suicide. Because of this economic hardship, farmers have been asking for reforms for decades. But this year, instead of providing more protections for this vulnerable community, the central government went in the opposite direction.
And farmers fear that the direction in which the reforms are happening are actually a direction of dismantling of the MSP.
So let's take a look at these 3 farming acts that sparked the protest. Each of them deregulates a different part of the system. The first act creates free, unregulated trade spaces outside the markets. The laws in these spaces would override wholesale market rules. And although a lot of trade takes place outside already, what happens in the markets remains a benchmark across the industry. But this act will create 2 parallel markets with very different rules. One with oversight and another that creates room for big corporate players to come in unregulated.
And in this dual market structure, the players in the regulated markets are bound to move out and operate in the deregulated spaces. And that is where farmers are going to lose out when these traditional spaces collapse onto themselves.
The second act creates a framework for contract farming deals. Any business agreements would be strictly between farmers and traders with little oversight, giving farmers few options to fight bad deals. As these agreements increase outside of wholesale markets, they could further fragment the market and leave small farmers dependent on terms set by big corporations or be cut out of the industry altogether.
ਉਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਦੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਫੇਲ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਦਾ ਰੇਟ ਤੈਅ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਹੈ ਹੌਲੀ ਹੌਲੀ ਇਸ ਰੇਟ ਨੂੰ ਵਧਾਉਣਗੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਪੂਰੀ ਦੀ ਪੂਰੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆ ਮੰਡੀ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਕਬਜ਼ਾ ਕਰਨਗੇ ਆਪਦਾ
मंडी आ जाएगी तो वो हमारा वो सिस्टम खत्म हो जाएगा.
The third act affects a different part of the chain. It eliminates the storage limits previously set by the government to control prices. Unlimited storage means that anyone with enough money can stock up. The problem is, without oversight, they can also start dictating prices. Altogether, the three acts invite big players into a fragmented and deregulated market that could lead to volatile prices for farmers.
And by deregulating the markets, the government has also put out a message in the same breath, essentially saying that they think farmers don't need any protection anymore from the government.
On June 3, 2020, when the government announced the farming reforms, it didn't take long for the impact to be felt on the ground. Wholesale markets around the country have already seen fewer crops arrive in their market yards. In the state of Madhya Pradesh, more than 40 markets have lost business.
Trading has moved out of regulated market spaces, and it is not as though good prices are being fetched by farmers. And this is the context in which farmers' anger has to be understood. They didn't get what they wanted, and what was thrust down upon them is very different from what they were asking for.
कि किसानों को इस कानून की ज़रूरत नहीं थी, इस कानून को रद्द किया जाए। और जो हमारी मीटिंगें हुई हमारे नेताओं की उनके साथ, उसमें वो एक बात बोलते हैं, वो छल करते हैं।
ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਸਿੱਖੀਆਂ ਆ, ਸਾਡੇ ਗਾਂ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੀਆਂ ਪੀੜ੍ਹੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਦੱਸ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਹੱਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਲੜਨਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆ ਵਾਜਬ ਆ। ਇੱਕ ਚਿੜੀ ਆ, ਉਹਦਾ ਜੇਕਰ ਕੋਈ ਆਲਣਾ ਵੀ ਤੋੜਦਾ ਆ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਚਿੜੀ ਵੀ ਚੈਂ ਚੈਂ ਕਰਦੀ ਰੌਲਾ ਪਾਉਂਦੀ ਆ।
All right. Well, thank you for watching that. I know that probably some of the audio video was a bit choppy, and that is beyond.
Not bad, but your voice is not clear now. It's
my voice is my voice.
There's echo there. Yeah.
Is it any better now? No. All right. Can you guys hear me?
There is still static, but we can.
Manish, you have an echo.
Yes. Well, I don't know what to do with my technological challenges here. Beg your pardon on that. I think it should come out. I think once there is a load on the video, then it kind of goes in and out. So hopefully in the next minute or so, my voice should be better, if it's not already better. Okay. Can you hear me now? Any better?
Not really.
Not better. All right. Well, at this point, I'll see what I can do. I'd like to transition.
I think if you rejoin, things will change.
If I end the meeting, then it might just end everything. So I don't want to do that.
Can everybody else mute, please, except Manish? Let's see.
Yeah, that might help. That might help. Yeah. Let's mute everybody because Manish is.
Right. And let me see if I can probably call in also, if that's something that might be better. Then I can mute myself in. All right. I'm going to do a quick. Let's see. Why is it not giving the option to call? Is it any better? Can you guys hear me, or no? Is it still bad?
No, it is same, Manish.
Same. Oh boy. Hello. Hello. Is it better?
Yeah, it's better.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Wonderful. Okay. So, well, thank you. Sorry about that, the technological glitch there at my end. All right. At this point, thank you for watching that video. We will also share the video in the chat link. So if you want to watch it again or share it with your friends, the video was made by Vox, so we don't have any proprietary rights on that. At this point, we will transition to our individual group statements. So I'd like to invite members from INSAF. Please introduce yourself and read out your statement.
Thank you, Manish. Hello all, my name is Praveen Kolaguri and I'm representing International Solidarity for Academic Freedom in India, along with Dr. Lothika Senga. Here's our statement. We condemn the Indian state's actions to discredit the farmers' protest movement as being misinformed and misled towards other vested political agendas, ranging from Maoism to Khalistan. In particular, on the occasion of India's Republic Day, when the farmers took out a peaceful tractor parade with due police permission, the farmers have rejected any links to the group that reached the Red Fort and planted a religious flag there, even as police in the vicinity were seen to be quietly watching. The farmers who are protesting today are part of a broader egalitarian movement for social and ecological justice. They're supported by farmers and social justice activists across the globe. Many protesting farmers have said that their demands are tied to the concerns of scholar activists and students who remain incarcerated under the draconian UAPA.
In a growing climate of fear and binary thinking, it's easy for the Indian government to label anyone who opposes their so-called agricultural or education reforms, land displacement, and mega development projects as Maoist. Such misdirections are intended to draw public attention away from the fact that it's the extremist neoliberal state itself that is encroaching upon people's lands and plundering India's natural resources. These misdirections are enthusiastically supported by the elite corporate media, which actively invisibilize their own role in the violence being unleashed against the protesting farmers, even as they glorify India's military. As an international network supporting academic freedom in India, we emphasize the importance of independent print and online media platforms and the necessity to take seriously the demands of the farmers, which are substantiated by long-standing research. We stand with the farmers in calling for the withdrawal of the farm bills and demand the repeal of the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act and the immediate release of all arrested citizens. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Singh and Praveen from INSAF. Next, we have Hindus for Human Rights, based out of the United States.
Hi, this is Swati representing Hindus for Human Rights. Hindus for Human Rights stands with the farmers in India who have come together in one of the largest ongoing movements demanding the repeal of the 3 contentious farm laws. The farmers have been protesting peacefully for months, following the principles of ahimsa. The protest sites have reaffirmed our faith in the idea of unity in diversity that defines India, as people from all walks of life have come together to provide seva in every possible way. We pay our respects to the farmers who have been martyred in the protest. More than 150 farmers have died. They shall not be forgotten, and their sacrifice inspires us to stand even stronger in the fight against injustice. Right to protest is a fundamental right. Our farmers have non-violently resisted water cannons, tear gas, police beatings, and continue to do so. The events on 26 January by fringe elements are condemnable, and we strongly denounce all forms of violence. Videos and images are emerging of police and hooligans unleashing violence on the farmers. Hinduism believes that power should be used to protect the weak and strengthen their voice, not silence and crush them. We condemn police brutality in India and urge the government to take action against officers for use of excessive force. One of our board members, Vijendra, participated in the Jangantantra Divas tractor rally, organized by multiple farmer groups in Karnataka to support the ongoing struggle in Delhi. The scene was a sea of tirangas, showcasing their respect to the nation. It was an inspirational experience for him to be shoulder to shoulder with farmers who were reclaiming the Republic on Republic Day. Patriotic slogans were all around and gave the group energy to go on and reach the Freedom Park in Bangalore, the meeting point for all the rallies. Vijay interacted with many youth and elderly farmers who had traveled from various parts of Karnataka for the protest. All his interactions conveyed how angry India's farmers are with the government for passing laws without consultation. The farmers he spoke to had read the laws, understood them perfectly, and were convinced that these laws were going to put them at the mercy of the corporates. They were fully prepared for a long-haul struggle, a message reinforced in many reports coming from Delhi protest sites as well. We stand with the farmers in India in their continued resistance against an increasingly autocratic government and pray yet again, Annadata Sukhi Bhava. Please shower blessings to our givers of food. Thank you.
Thank you, Swati from Hindus for Human Rights. Next, we have on the list from Boston South Asian Council, BSAC.
Yeah, hello everybody, greetings. My name is Saeed Ahmed. I am representing the Boston South Asian Coalition. I'll just give a little bit of introduction about the organization. The Boston South Asian Coalition Coalition, or in short, BSAC. We are an intergenerational South Asian-led organization based in the greater Boston area. We stand for gender and racial equity, environmental and economic justice. We are against caste discrimination and support human rights for all. Here is our statement. The Boston South Asian Coalition stands in solidarity with the Farmers' Tractor Parade and condemns police violence. BSAC congratulates the millions of farmers for the historic march and tractor parade on January 26, 2021. The march was largely peaceful and was part of a long history of peasant movement of India. BSAC stands in full support of the farmers who have demonstrated superb organization and resolve. The tractor parade showed the ingenuity where the agricultural producing class brought their instruments of production as a show of strength against a government which is acting at the behest of a few parasitic capitalists like Ambani and Adani and multinational corporations. The farm laws, which were passed without any consultation with hundreds of millions of farmers, are completely against their interest. BSAC condemns the violence the police in Delhi unleashed at the farmers on January 26th, while the farmers were exercising their right to protest with a massive tractor parade. On Republic Day, which is January 26th, we witnessed the police effectively acting against the people's interest in order to break people's resistance against the grand corporate theft. The farmer struggle is not only for the survival of the majority of Indians dependent on agriculture, but also an anti-imperialist one. The farmers have challenged the BJP government as well as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, who have been demanding these pro-corporate laws for decades. The tractor parade displayed the vibrancy of the Indian Republic in contrast to the state choreographed tableau parade on Janpath. The Modi government must see the writing on the wall and immediately roll back the 3 farm laws and guarantee a minimum support price, MSP. The unhinged state violence against the farmers has further galvanized the people of India, and the people in the diaspora are against the 3 farm laws. Farmers have a constitutional right to protest at the Delhi border sites until the demands are met. No repression of the farmers will be tolerated. To reiterate, the Modi government must immediately withdraw the 3 farm laws, guarantee minimum support price for all farmers, immediately withdraw all cases against leaders of the Samyukta Kisan Morcha, SKM, and the All India Kisan Sangharsh Coordination Committee, AIKSCC. Stop the disinformation campaign against the Kisan movement and ensure the farmers' rights to protest at the Delhi border without the threat of violence. With that, I would also like to reiterate the joint demands from all of the organizations on this platform, which are, again, repeal the farm laws, support constructive engagement with farmers, and last but not the least, have joint parliamentary committee to draft farmers' laws in consultation with leadership of the farmers' movement. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Saeed from Boston South Asian Coalition for this forceful statement. Next, I'd like to invite from Australia our friends from the Humanism Project.
Thank you, Manish. This is Deepak on behalf of the Humanism Project in Australia. Since September last year, hundreds of thousands of farmers have been protesting the new laws that aim to deregulate Indian agriculture. They have clearly stated that these laws will severely affect their livelihoods, dismantle their safeguards, and create greater instability and put the country's food security at risk. while simultaneously creating opportunity for large private corporations to enter and exploit the agricultural sector. Our major concern is that these reforms were pushed through Parliament without consultation with the largest stakeholders, who are the farming community, and without parliamentary scrutiny, debate, or even a vote. It is evident that the government does not have the interest of the agricultural community in mind when these so-called reforms were being rushed through and being foisted on an already distressed community. It is not just a battle for our farmers, but a broad people's movement for the democratic right of all Indians to seek accountability from the Indian government. And on 26 January, Republic Day, we saw thousands of farmers on tractors and on foot march to the nation's capital from the Delhi border, where they have been camping since November last year, in a show of their democratic right to protest against a fascist regime. The tractor rally made it the most memorable Republic Day in independent India's history. The people of Delhi welcomed the farmers with open arms. And before you remind us of reports on violence by the protesters on Republic Day, please bear in mind that there were hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of Delhi on the day, almost all of them from outside of Delhi. And yet, the march went off as planned without the residents of Delhi, women among them, being harassed or their properties being damaged. Predictably, the protesters are being bullied, maligned, beaten, and being arrested under anti-terror and sedition laws after the incidents on 26 January. These tactics by the government are following the same pattern, the same playbook that was used against the anti-CAA protesters, the victims of the 2020 Delhi riots, and the Hathras rape victims' family. In fact, the same script was repeated on the 29th of January when a mob of masked goons pelted stones and sticks at farmers at the Singhu border, where the farmers had been camping. Tents were destroyed and several farmers were injured. Not surprisingly, the riot police present at the spot just stood by and watched. And today, we got the news of the arrest of journalist Mandeep Punia, who exposed the nexus of police and BJP workers among the stone-pelting goons. Any violence or unlawful actions need to be investigated and the culprits brought to book. However, such incidents should not be blown up as a distraction from the real issue at hand, and that is the farmers' protest against these undemocratically imposed laws. Therefore, we ask that the farms laws be repealed, be rewritten after consultations with the farmers, and sent back to the parliament for proper debate and voting, like in a real democracy. We also ask that the cases filed against the protesting farmers, their leaders, and the journalists covering the movement be withdrawn immediately. We have another ask. A free press is the lifeline of a democracy. It uncovers truth and holds truth to power. We ask that you reclaim your role as champions of democracy, expose the misinformation and false propaganda against our farmers, hold those in power to account, and help India reclaim the lofty ideals of democracy. We owe it to the nation we love. Kisan Mazdoor Ekta Zindabad. Long live the farmer-worker unity. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepak from Australia. We really appreciate you coming aboard. And just so you know, the commitment of this group is it's about 2 a.m. I believe in Australia, and they are awake for us and making their voices heard. So really appreciate that. At this point, we've been talking about all the protests. As I'd like to play a very short 2-minute video before we transition to the next statement here. So.
Protesting at the Singhu crossing in the outskirts of India's capital, New Delhi, protesting farmers face off against groups of men who are shouting slogans against them. Some farmers are seen calling for calm, while police fire tear gas and use their batons with force. Tension's been rising since Tuesday, India's Republic Day, when the farmers' major tractor rally culminated in these scenes at New Delhi's famous Red Fort. Authorities blame some of the farmers for instigating the violence.
My government has always respected freedom of expression and holding of peaceful protests in a democratic setup. However, the recent acts of dishonouring the national flag and showing disrespect to the auspicious occasion of the Republic Day are unfortunate.
The opposition boycotted the president's speech in solidarity with the farmers, who accused supporters of the governing BJP of causing the recent unrest, both in the protest camps and at the Red Fort.
The farmers' movement did not have any plan to get into the city or to go to the Red Fort or unfurl the flag. That doesn't take their demand forward. The farmers' movement is secular. They don't use religious symbols. So this is clearly a conspiracy, and what you saw today at the Singhu border is a continuation of that conspiracy.
Farmers have been holding these sit-ins for 2 months. They want the government to scrap laws aimed at modernising the industry. The farmers believe the changes only benefit big business and will damage their livelihoods. There's been increasing pressure to close down the protest sites. On Thursday night, extra police were sent to one site on the other side of the capital, at Ghazipur. But union leaders say any retreat would constitute a surrender, and a call for action saw thousands more farmers arrive instead.
Our leader cried for help, and with him cried the farmers of India. That is why we decided early this morning that we should come quickly.
The protests are the biggest challenge to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government.
We liked this government during the elections, so we voted for them. And now they are defaming us. They are betraying us, not the other way around.
They're promising to stay until the laws are repealed, but talks with the government have so far been unsuccessful. Alexia O'Brien, Al Jazeera.
All right, thank you very much. At this point, I'd like to transition to our next speaker of the day from Young India, from Washington, D.C.
Thanks, Manish. If you guys can hear me. I want to start by bringing up one debate that Manish and I always have, which is about locus standi. And that is, what locus standi do the groups in the diaspora have communicating back to people on policy issues like the farmers' issues. And I think I want to just say that the diaspora shares this kinship of aspiration with everybody of Indian origin in India, anywhere in the world, towards developing and enhancing democratic rights. And that's what we're trying to show today, our solidarity with the people in India today. They're the farmers. Last year, they were the CA and NRC protesters, that there is this kinship that we have with them, no matter where we are, what state of affairs in our own adopted countries, that whenever there is a need, there is an assault on democracy and democratic rights, that we will stand up with them. With that, I want to transition to my statement. My name is Rohit Tripathi. I am in Washington, D.C., in the suburbs, and here's our statement. For the past 2 months, thousands of farmers have gathered at the outskirts of Delhi in protest of 3 farm laws that recently passed by the Indian Parliament. But the deeper angst has been rooted in the decades of systemic neglect of the small farmers of India. These farmers make up the vast majority of the country's agricultural class. Today, the farmers believe that the new laws passed without consultation with their unions render the country's 60% plus agriculturalists vulnerable to corporate interests in the absence of adequate safeguards. The constitutionality of the laws and their economic impact may be contested, but the farmers' constitutional rights to protest peacefully cannot be questioned. A historic satyagraha is unfolding before the world as farmers from across the country have come together in solidarity to brave the pandemic and excesses of the police amidst Delhi's bitter cold. Over the last few weeks, as different state governments have tried to disrupt the peaceful farmers and restrict their movement, our Annadatas, bread givers, have shown the way through their nonviolent and resolute perseverance. From dug-up highways to water cannons to being given labels of terrorists and anti-nationals, to being threatened with violence, to having stones pelted at them, to all sorts of conspiracies to defame their leaders and forcibly vacate the protest sites, these satyagrahis have taken every blow peacefully and marched forward. The sincerity of their concerns the restraint shown under extreme duress, their mutual fraternity, and their warmth with the society at large have shown these farmers to be the most durable keepers of our collective conscience. It is no wonder that goodwill garnered by this movement has crossed geographic and demographic boundaries. Agricultural policy has long been formulated in India without any meaningful farmer consultation. The passage of the current laws is only the most egregious example of this insular policymaking. Farmers do not have strong and effective caucuses in the major political parties, and their political needs are usurped by the politics of identity, leaving them fragmented and unrepresented. But today, they seem to have found their voice, and the nation and its diaspora are ready to resonate with them. The farmers' response to this legislation is also a strong reminder of the importance of strengthening our federalism. Agriculture is a state subject in our constitution. The central government has violated our federal ethos by passing sweeping regulations on a state subject under the guise of a technical loophole. Thus, it is now paying the price of upending legislative norms of due consultation and debate that leads to sound policies. Sadly, this legislative action, coupled with the government's reaction to the concerns raised by the farmers, is reminiscent of colonial times. The violence that has been unleashed by goons of the ruling dispensation with full support of the various security agencies, as captured by many journalists on video, show the nefarious anti-farmer stance of the current government. The constant effort of the government to turn a farmer's issue into a Sikh versus Hindu issue or a national security issue with the Khalistan angle is deeply deplorable. We urge the government to pay heed to the concerns of the poor farmers of the country that are bedrock of our food security and national prosperity. We also urge them to examine its handling of this issue using the constitutional framework. We stand in unwavering solidarity with India's farmers. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Rohit, for that forceful statement, as always. Next, we have up on the list Foundation, the London Story. Right. Do I have the speaker here? Right. Do we have the Foundation, the London Story speakers here? All right. While we're waiting on that, I'll transition to the Friends of India from Texas. I believe it's Nidhi Trehan who's reading out the statement on behalf of the Friends of India, Texas. Can you guys hear me?
Nidhi, can you unmute yourself, please?
Sorry about that. Sorry, I started speaking and yeah. Okay, I represent Friends of India, Texas, and we are a Texas-based organization of Indian Americans and allies working to promote the true spirit of India as envisioned by its founders and enshrined in its constitution. And that is of a democratic and secular nation. And I wanted to just start really quickly because I just felt that the allied groups had given a wonderful presentation. All of them have really identified the serious issues, the serious challenges to our democracy today. So what I wanted to do with our time is just amplify some of the voices on the ground of both activists and scholars in India today. And I wanted to just start with Gurpreet Kaur Vasi's a very heartfelt message. She's a digital entrepreneur and social activist based in India. And she sent a very powerful message on her Facebook wall about Republic Day and what happened. And this is her statement. I believe in the idea of India. I am proudly Indian. I hate the thought of violence. I am a Gandhi fan. I love Delhi. I love our national days. And I wish I didn't have to explain this to anyone. But today is that day when I feel as if everything I am is suspect because a peaceful protest turned hostile. For 2 months, we turned a blind eye to the pain and frustration simmering on our borders. And I would add, it's been much longer than 2 months, what's been coming up with the farm bills. And today, and she's talking about Republic Day, when it boils over, our jaws drop as if this was some bolt out of oblivion. What did you expect? Do you think that 20,000 armed forces the famed police force, the anti-riot squads, and the Central Reserve Police Force could not stop a few hundred jokers breach the Red Fort? Don't you see this is a most dangerous conspiracy and machination to sabotage the farmers' protests? I was at Singhu last night when a faction of farmers who are not part of Sanyukt Kisan Morcha of 40 farmers' unions suddenly announced that they wouldn't follow the tractor parade route decided between the authorities and the Sanyukt Kisan Morcha, and that they will do this as a separate parade. Deep Sidhu, a known BJP mole, suddenly appeared on stage with an extremely provocative speech promoting separatism to sabotage farmer protests. This morning, the farmers' parade was to start at noon, but I had already received a message on the previous night from a person who was to accompany me that a media insider had told her that, quote, action would start early in the day. Now I'm wondering, how did she know? True to the insider tip, a faction of farmers who are not part of the SKM appeared on the border at 8 a.m., as did the strategically placed empty DTC buses and other vehicles, so that, quote, public property could be damaged conveniently and captured on camera. The entire paid TV media has been showing this footage nonstop. They reached just in time, too. And in the most filmy way, a faction led by the BJP mole Deep Sidhu gets immediate access to the Red Fort building, that too on Republic Day? Are we so silly and naive? Is this some kind of Netflix soap? Can you imagine an incident like this happening without the involvement of agencies? So I will just skip a few parts. The sad part is that all 40 Kisan unions innocently started their tractor parade on the route agreed between them and the government at the scheduled time. Along with a group of friends, we witnessed this peaceful tractor parade for hours together. People of Delhi were showering flowers on them. Not a single national channel covered the official parade. To cut off the social media streaming, internet was strategically blocked so that the live feed from Sanyukt Kisan Morcha's channel was cut off from the rest of the country. And look at the Facebook worms running out of their closets to send me congratulations for the violence messages. Take your messages and shove them where they belong. Republic Day is not your grandfather's wedding anniversary. The day is mine as much as it's anybody's. And it hurts immensely to see simple, gullible farmers who've traveled from faraway places, decorated their tractors, brought new clothes to make their own parade, to be made pawns of this dirty politics. It hurts to see your dirty politics smear the sanctity of our 72nd Republic Day. You are the culprits, not them. So Gurpreet Kaur is clearly, obviously, very upset about what's happening on the ground and the manipulation of what actually happened. And just to bring this, I would like to close by sharing a thought from a Delhi University professor, Dr. Prem Singh, and bring this to the macro level. So 2 achievements of the ongoing peasant movement in opposition to the 3 agricultural laws, which have transformed this movement into nothing short of exemplary, are carving out a space for democratic resistance and expanding awareness of the ill effects of capitalism pushed through policies of privatization and corporatization. These 2 achievements of the peasant movement contain special significance in view of the dictatorial attitude of the present government and in the face of its organized maneuverings to discredit every adversary, all citizens and organizations who are not following this blind race on the path of privatization and corporatization. Of these 2 achievements, the second one is more significant. India's democracy lives on, despite all its shortcomings. There are occasions of growing and shrinking space for democratic rights in it, but the peasant movement has, for the first time, at least warned the ruling class and civil society against the blind moves of the government, which supports this privatization and corporatization. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Friends of India, Texas. A very forceful, very well-worded statement as well. At this point, I've been delegated to speak a statement which is written on behalf of 18 groups. So that is in addition to the more than dozen groups we have on this call. So I will read it as follows. We, the Indian diaspora, living in different parts of the world, write to you with great anguish and distress about the 3 Farm Acts, which corporatize agriculture, threaten food security, compromise democracy, and above all, sidestep core constitutional mechanisms. In addition to the law's reprehensible provisions and their having been passed in a dubious manner during a pandemic, they also clearly violate the Constitution. The farm laws relate directly to the regulation of markets, which fall under the exclusive jurisdiction of states within India's federal structure. The passing of the farm laws is therefore unconstitutional, and several states, including Kerala, Punjab, and Chhattisgarh, have expressed their disapproval of the centre's unlawful interference. Although the Supreme Court has indeed stayed the implementation of the laws, it is not directly tackling the unconstitutionality as its direct mandate. Instead, it is advocating unsolicited mediation between the farmers and the elected representatives. We stand in solidarity with the farmers of India who have been protesting for nearly 3 months now, a period excessively prolonged due to the insincere response of the government to their legitimate grievances. While the government claims to be holding dialogues and on January 20th, 2021, agreed to temporarily suspend the laws, its proposals do not constitute a permanent solution, leading us to conclude that these are mere delaying tactics and attempts to defeat the movement. In addition to the Indian diaspora, members of the parliament in the UK, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, as well as other political actors worldwide have criticized the farm laws and raised concerns about the manner in which the government has responded to the protesting farmers. As a first step, we demand the government of India to turn the moratorium of the three above-mentioned act into an immediate repeal. We urge the government to seriously consider the remaining demands of the protesting farmers, to guarantee a minimum support price for all agricultural produce, to implement the findings of the Swaminathan Commission, and to convene an exclusive parliamentary session to resolve all outstanding grievances of farmers. It is in the interest of the government to bring a swift resolution to this crisis so as to re-establish trust in democracy and government institutions. This will further allow everyone to dedicate full attention to equally pressing matters such as the ongoing health and economic crisis. The movement has been peaceful from the onset, despite frequent provocation by police, and farmers have declared their intention to hold a peaceful protest outside Delhi on January 26, 2021. The onus is now on the government to ensure peace. We extend our complete solidarity to the farmers in their struggle for justice and freedom. Jai Hind. And this organization, I'll read out the names for the organization as well. Indian Resistance Network from Norway, India Solidarity from Germany, Indian Alliance Paris, France, Indian Solidarity from Finland, the Crescent Hub from Kuwait, Indian Solidarity Sweden, European Union Liberal Indian Amsterdam Chapter from Netherlands, Scottish Indians for Justice Scotland, the Liberal Indians France, the London Story Netherlands, Collective Against Violation and Abuse of Civil and Human Rights from Germany, Canadians Against Oppression and Persecution from Canada, Voices Against Fascism in India from United States, New Zealanders United to Save the Indian Constitution from New Zealand, International Solidarity for Academic Freedom in India, who are also part of the conference today, from Europe, International Network of Democratic Indians Abroad from United Kingdom, the Humanism Project from Australia, the Progressive India Collective from United States, and Coalition Against Fascism in India. And this letter was sent out to all to Indian embassies on January 20, 2021. So all the actions have been done publicly to respond to these grievances of the farmers and make sure that our civil voices are heard in solidarity to the farmers. With that, I will move on to our penultimate transition of the press conference to invite our last speaker for the statement from Global Indian Progressive Alliance, Ms. Shagufta Hakim. Shagufta, you need to unmute yourself.
I am unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, great. All right, my name is Shagufta Hakim, and I'm an independent scholar based out of North Carolina. I will be delivering the press release for the Global Indian Progressive Alliance. The Global Indian Progressive Alliance is a grassroots organization headquartered in New Jersey. We stand for bringing people together to build progressive communities via community engagement by academics, researchers, students, political and civil organizers, corporate professionals, grounded in evidence-based research, driven in the pursuits of facts, rationality, advocacy, liberty, and social justice. As progressive Indians, we are again disturbed to see the ramming through of laws without any attempt at consensus building. There has been no discussion with other political parties, citizen groups, affected stakeholders, or academics in developing bills and passing them through Parliament, suppressing even the parliamentary debate process. In this instance, in a move affecting smallholder farmers, over 60% of the country's population, the central government pushed 3 farm bills through both houses of the parliament, eliminating government engagement in the agriculture sector through the guarantee of market support prices. This pushes Indian farmers into an unregulated market structure, potentially pitting small farmers against large corporates without recourse to address grievances within the judicial system. These laws ignore the history of the states that have experimented with such a system where grain selling prices remain markedly lower than the rest of the country, pushing marginalized farmers deeper into poverty. Instead of the government getting involved with supporting the livelihoods of more than half her citizens, developing environmental protections and sustainable farming practices, the government has chosen to side with the unregulated market forces. The government has repeatedly ignored the calls by farmers for greater support. Even before the passage of these laws, the farm sector has struggled with a multitude of protests at various times and in various cities in the last few years, with the largest being in Maharashtra in 2018, an occurrence also ignored by the central government. And the current rallies outside Delhi are not reflections of dissatisfaction by farmers from Punjab and Haryana alone, but have received support from farmers across the country with protests in every city across India. Instead of addressing the growing anger through genuine attempts at resolution, the government has made insincere overtures, including involving the Supreme Court to merely delay implementation. They have also repeatedly used the police against the citizens, and they are responsible to protect, but they've been falsely charging journalists, opposition leaders, and farmer leaders of inciting violence, despite over 60 days of peaceful protests. The government has attacked farmers and attempted to compel them to leave protest sites. As members of the Indian diaspora, we demand the Indian government to recognize the right to peaceful protest, acknowledging the peaceful protests outside Delhi for the last 60 days and of prior farmer protests against the country. 2, commit to ensure safety of peaceful dissenters, securing cooperation between law enforcement agencies and protest organizers in a transparent manner. 3, commit publicly to engaging with protesting groups to address their demands and include stakeholders, in this case the farmers' unions and groups, as part of review of existing laws and bills brought to Parliament going forward. So nothing about us without us. And 4, in the case of these specific farm laws, repeal the laws and submit bills to a parliamentary committee for review and stakeholder engagement as per prior parliamentary norms. And number 5, as mentioned by many other groups today, is to implement the Swaminathan Commission recommendations. In closing, we expressly state our solidarity with India's farmers and insist on sincere and active engagement with them to resolve the current crisis and allow attention to return to the simultaneous public health and economic crises that the country faces. We also hope that Indian Parliament recognizes the compassion of all diaspora voices and the deep concern we feel for the current political climate. And this is on behalf of the Global Indian Progressive Alliance. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hakim. Thank you, Shagufta, for a wonderful statement again. At this point, since we're done with all our statements here, we'll transition to the last phase of this press conference. We do have members from the press, and even if there are individuals who have questions, I've already put in the chat window, please use your raise hand feature so we can unmute you and have a discussion on the press conference here. Are there any questions from our friends here for the press conference? All right, I say that in my classes when there are no questions, either we really did very well, that everybody understood what we said, or we just bombed. And I like to believe in the former. So, all right, jokes apart, anybody has a question here?
Manish, what I used to do was to start asking questions of students.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe we should ask the journalists some questions.
We'll do the Socratic method here. Exactly. Absolutely. All right.
Manish, I want to thank you, my friend, for taking such awesome leadership every single time. And again, this time again. So just to all our coalition partners, I mean, I don't know if we can't we give him a round of applause, but I just really want to thank him for his sincerity and his dedication.
No, that's okay. This is not about me here, but I appreciate you saying that. Thank you so much. I'd like to invite Mr. Lalit Jha from PTI. He has his hand up first. If you'd like to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you want people to see you, please go ahead with your question or your comment.
Hi, can you see me?
We can see a blank
okay,
wall.
let me fix this first.
Yes. There you go.
Sorry.
We can see you now. We can see you now.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you about the support. Can you give us a broader sense of the support that the Indian diaspora is providing to the farmers in India? Are you also providing some material support, like sending them some funds to take care of their daily needs or technological things? And how, are you also reaching out to the governments in the West, outside India? I have seen some statements coming out from Canada, some other countries as well. How do you see those statements coming from foreign leaders? So 2 questions basically. Thank you.
All right. Okay. All right. Do I have any volunteers here? I mean, I can field the question, but it'd be nice for our fellow friends also to take a lead. Any volunteer?
Lalitji, let me take a first crack at it. Thank you so much for coming. I think on the question of material support, I'm not aware of any significant material support. I think our fundamental goal has been to listen to our friends on the ground, the farmers themselves, the activist friends that we have that work with them, and just amplify their voice globally and amongst the diaspora itself. I think awareness is a big aspect of our activism, and just challenging some of the misinformation and disinformation. That in itself, it seems to be, at least from circles that we move around, the main goal of the diaspora, just awareness and just challenging the disinformation and just giving them moral support at this point.
Yeah, Manish, may I add something?
Yes, please, Dr. Singh, go ahead.
Yeah, Lalit, thank you for that question. I don't think the farmers on the ground are in need of any material help. What they need is moral support. And as Tripathi ji pointed out, Rohit pointed out, that's what we are providing. In fact, the structure in Delhi would like to hear that there are huge monies flowing from Canada or UK, and these are Khalistani-based organizations. We need to be wary of that. I think, as many of us, including myself, pointed out, we feel, as Rohit also made that point at the beginning of his presentation, we cannot ignore what's going on in India just because we live outside. Of course, our friends and relatives in India sometimes kick us around for that. Oh, why don't you take care of Trump? We'll take care of Modi. No, that's not something that is a choice. It's a global world. Everything is interconnected. There have been references to new liberalism. There's references to white supremacy and racism here. There's a majoritarian mindset in India that this government has been trying to amplify for almost now, 7 years. And we have a voice in it. If the parties there are willing to accept millions of dollars as donations from the NRIs, then they should be willing to hear our perspectives too. So that's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Singh, you're right. Indian diaspora has a historical past about they're being aware, not only being aware, but also raising their voice against things happening in India, right from Gadri movement to Dr. Subramanian Swamy in emergency and elections. You rightly mentioned about elections when call centers are being set up by across the parties, be it the Congress, BJP, Aam Aadmi Party, or the Akali Dal. People from here go back to India to campaign for that. But let me ask you one question about, you mentioned in your initial speech about Khalistani groups. Are you worried about that they have included into your system? They're trying to take benefit out of, bring a bad name or benefit out of this this movement that's going on in India and overseas as well. You know, the Sikh for Justice had announced a award of $250,000 for anyone who raises the flag or the red fort, right? This was there, and they have been announcing the rewards as well over there.
Well, look, I'm not an expert on this issue, and I'm not sure about the veracity of this $250,000 award. There's a lot of disinformation. I don't think there is much of an involvement of Khalistani groups. First of all, let's recognize that there was some interest in Khalistan soon after the happenings in 1984. And if I visit Gurdwaras in Toronto, in Vancouver, in Seattle, most of that thought has disappeared. Does it mean that it has completely disappeared? Probably not. And this is the thing to remember about movements in general. I don't know what happened at the Lal Killa. There's at least 10 versions of what actually went about, whether this guy, what is his name? Roop Sandhu, right?
Deep Sandhu.
Deep Sandhu. Yeah, I mean, his family in Bathinda has a pretty desultory history. His father was a kind of a mole in the community. He was in the jail for many years. So I don't think anything that happened even with the Deep Sandhu is particularly a problem. Kesari, what we call the Sikh flag, is flown on our army units. It's flown on the border. It's not a Khalistani flag. This is utter nonsense. I don't think Khalistanis have any role in this. Are there a few people who have sympathies for that cause? Why not? After 1984, no one has been punished except one person, right? It's a huge matter of unhappiness in the Sikh community. So if there are some Sikhs who are a little more vocal about it and they embrace some idea of Khalistan, that's not surprising.
Well, just to not to interject Dr. Singh here, we as the Diaspora group have been very cautious of not aligning ourselves with any separatist movement. We don't stand for it. And I can categorically speak for everyone involved in this call on that issue. But so I want to make sure that we have that record set straight on behalf of the entire diaspora represented in this call. The second, circling it back to Mr. Jhaz, your question about the role of diaspora, the biggest thing that we have seen is it's about reclaiming the narrative also that has been set by the extreme far right wing about everything that happens under the edges of the hyper-nationalist Hindutva-led government is endorsed by the Indian Americans or by Indian Europeans or anybody, the global Indian diaspora. But that is not the case, unfortunately. As we can see, there are about 50 odd organizations just on this press conference that we have, representing hundreds and thousands of people across board. So the idea that we want to make sure that we get back in India is that there is a sizable Indian American audience, and when I say global Indian diaspora audience, I should say that, who stand against the dictatorial or the totalitarian style of government that we see, or the laws that are passed without the consultation of the groups that are involved. Now, whether it was going back to the Article 370s and the 35A, the Jammu Kashmir movement, or the CAA, or what we see right now with the farmers' laws. So I want to make sure that we understand that very clearly, that the global Indian diaspora is in solidarity with our farmers, and at the heart of it, we stand in solidarity with the Constitution of India, which is what brings us all of us together as we know that there are progressive voices in this call. There are Hindu voices, there are Sikh voices, there are Muslim voices, there are Ambedkar voices here. So we see that besides all those voices, the fundamental love for us is to coming together in support of the vulnerable classes, whether it's through the economic or the social stratification, and also standing in solidarity with the Constitution of India, and also to supporting the idea, the emphasis about a parliamentary and a participative democracy. We don't see that anymore at this point, and that is what has brought us together also. So I hope that answers your question to some degree. In terms of the providing material support, I'm not sure, like we haven't been able to do that. We're sending money or sending blankets or anything like that. But if there are groups that we can probably talk about that if that kind of support is needed. Again, keeping in the regulation of the legalities of things. That's what we want to make sure we do that. Does that answer your question, Mr. Jha?
Yeah, I have one more question. That was a question asked about how is the global diaspora reaching out to the leaders overseas, like in the congressmen or senators in the US, or elected representative in the US or other Britain or Canada, Australia.
Right. Okay. All right. So let's see if Deepak has his hand up if he wants to respond as well.
Yes. In fact, I raised my hand to answer that question. Indian communities in different parts of Australia have raised the issue with their respective members of parliament, and this issue has come up more than once when parliamentarians from different parties have raised the issue of the Indian farmers' agitation within the Australian Parliament, and it has also been raised by members of the state assemblies. So yes, that has certainly happened. About the you mentioned the Khalistan movement. I have been to many protests in Melbourne, which is where I live. You do see the odd person carrying a Khalistan flag, but they are, if at all, very rare, and they do not get any engagement from the rest of the community. In fact, they take great care to avoid giving them any coverage at all. So that's been my experience in Melbourne. I can only talk about that. But yes, the issue continues to be raised with the Australian government by members of parliament as well as the communities here in Australia.
Just to clarify, my question was, do you fear that the supporters of Khalistani groups are including into your movement based on the press releases that they have been issuing? My question was not about do you support that movement or not. Thank you.
No, they have not been. I'm sorry, Deepak, just one. No, they have not. We vet our groups here that are part of this press conference and the people we align with, and these are some things where they're non-negotiables. We do not negotiate or include people who have any sympathy for causes which don't find space, at least in our political discourse and social discourse. Period. Deepak, please go ahead.
Yes, I already addressed the Khalistan issue. That us supporting them is out of the question anyway. But I find that the broad community, the Sikh community in particular, does not support that at all. That has been my experience and observation in Melbourne from the protests that I've been to here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Manish, just one quick sentence.
If we can have some other members also be able to talk. Let's see. Yeah, so all right, let's see. I have Rohit in the sequence, Kalol, Rohit, and then Karthik. Kalol, please go ahead. And please recognize yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Kalol, you are again in mute.
All right, Kalol, we can see you, but you need to unmute yourself, please. And please recognize yourself before you ask your question or a comment.
Okay, I'm Kalol Bhattacharjee from the Hindu newspaper.
Please go ahead.
Okay, I just want to ask this question because you are, of course, outside India and looking at Indian domestic scenario from outside this point of view. You know, whenever the world community says something about the domestic unrest in India, India responds by saying that India has a pluralistic tradition, it has got an inclusive constitution, it's got a liberal constitution, and so on and so forth. But how does the world really view the human rights violations? Because the farmers' protest, and especially the crackdown, is an obvious human rights violation, right? So how do you think the world views these aberrations inside India, especially because India is considered to be this beacon of liberal third world democracy? It's the largest democracy in the world. So can you just maybe one of you could just deal with it? How does the world view India as India appears to be so different from the concept and the idea of India?
Right. That is a great question, Kalol. Thank you for joining us from the Hindu. Rohit, did you had your hand up? Would you like to respond?
I did, and I just
And actually, after you, I would like to invite Swati also on the list. She just put her tips.
So, Carol, thank you for that question, and what a great question that is, and that's something that most people on this coalition deal with on a daily basis. India obviously was seen as a beacon of pluralism, unity and diversity, and all the good things that its founders basically had envisioned it to be, up until, I would say, a few years ago. But I think clearly in the last 3 to 4 years, and going back to Professor Singh's point about the relevance of Trump, the last 4 years, and of course after the re-election of the current government, things have definitely taken a negative turn. I think the CA NRC protests and now the farmers movement and the attitude that the government has taken towards dissent in general has been duly noted. I think if this idea that people outside are just unaware of what's happening on the ground is foolhardy. The world, not only just the world is in the general public sense, elected leaders are well aware of what's happening in India. And you probably saw, there were statements even when, the Kashmir action was taken last year and so on and so forth. So I think overall, there is a apprehension now when people look at India, and they do follow, how the judiciary is acting, how elections are conducted, political violence, caste violence, religious violence. All of those things are absolutely being duly noted. And one last thing I would say is that there is a global progressive movement afoot, and it is more connected than ever before. Information is flowing very freely. The level of understanding that people have of global issues, and I'm going to call out my young millennial friends, that they are at so much better at understanding some of these global trends than my generation was. I'm not that much older than them, but still. So I think there is a real apprehension towards the state of democracy in India among all demographics of people interested in India, be it the think tank community, be it the elected officials in parliamentary, federal, local positions, or the diaspora in general. And one last thing I would say to Lalit's point, Manish, before I turn it over, I think what the diaspora ultimately wants, and I think what most people ultimately want in a democracy, is reasonableness. These are all movements and protests that want to, if we've never had it, then to achieve a state of reasonableness when stakeholders are seen as stakeholders. When as I think Swati said, I think Shagupta said, the slogan that the civil rights leaders here say, nothing about us without us. So I'll stop there. I hope I answered your question, Kalol.
Yeah.
Right. And just to add to your question here, yes, India's reputation has been taking a beating now, and this is not just as a result of the farmers' law. There is a precedent that we are seeing a constant degradation of the civil voice, of the voice that have a dissenting opinion against the government's positions. And that we have seen, like I said, right, starting with Article 370, 35A, CAA, and now here we are. In today's times, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has spoken for the farmers in India, showing support for their protests, including the United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres also has done that, including about 36 lawmakers that have spoken for farmers in India, or for the allowance of the peaceful protest, which is our constitutional fundamental right by the Article 19.1 that allows people to protest peacefully. So we do see that there is, and also in terms of the reputation that we spoke about and how it is being taken a beating, since last year, particularly after the CAA, which was a watershed moment, for the India's social and political demographic we're trying to achieve there. There is an organization called USERF. They put India in the list of countries of particular concern, and which is not a very pleasant list to be on that. And what that list basically tells us is that the concern is about the religious freedom / religious tolerance or intolerance. So we are seeing all these different events, and which is what us being as patriots, or as people who, even though we live outside India, but our heart and home right now is in India, and we do feel concerned about it. So unfortunately, we have seen these turn of events which has brought India's international reputation at stake at multiple levels. And again, we hope that the government works with different groups. We are also willing to talk to the government and put our point of across, sitting across the table, and see how we can achieve a consensus, which serves in the interest of the government's vision for the country, a progressive vision, and also the people who are being served on. Their also voices being heard. Let's see. I would like to transition at this point to Swati Garg to respond to add to the question, and then Jyotsna would be next.
So I think you handled the answer very well. So I just wanted to share some personal experience as to where India stands. I have a lot of American friends who absolutely adore Gandhi. But the thing was, when the insurrection at White House happened, my friends were actually shocked when Modi tweeted. They're like, is it really true that Narendra Modi tweeted against Donald Trump? And also that when with the Joe Biden thing, when Modi tweeted to Joe Biden, people were shocked that India's prime minister is supporting a democratic-led election. So the way India's policies have been, and the way we have been friends with the dictators of the country and the fascist regimes, I don't think that anyone anymore sees us as the beacon of democracy that we once were. People just see it as this lost land that had great ideas once upon a time. But that's pretty much it. We definitely have lost the moral credibility as of now.
All right, thank you. Jyotsna Kapoor.
Yeah, hi. I'm speaking from INSAF India. We are very, very concerned about the loss of academic freedom, the attacks on academics, poets, activists, filmmakers. Indian universities are on the list of scholars at risk. So I agree with Swati. I mean, we're completely losing any credibility in terms of democracy or freedom. And, and it makes a mockery of the new education policy and this sort of claim from the BJP that India is going to be a Vishwa Guru or sort of this world guru, when every day we hear of newer and newer assaults on academic freedom, the latest being this thing that now to hold an international Zoom conference, and this just came out yesterday, that universities will have to get permission from the Ministry for External Affairs. This is just ridiculous in the day and age of the World Wide Web. How are they going to restrict participants? So thank you for your question. I think in many ways, India's lead as this place for intellectual freedom and democracy has been severely compromised by the Modi government.
All right. Thank you, Jyotsna, for the comment. Next, we have Karthik from Ambedkar King Study Circle. Karthik, please unmute yourself.
Hey, Manish, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're good to go.
Hi. Thank you very much. So it is Karthik from Ambedkar King Study Circle. I would like to respond to both the questions from PTA and from the Hindu. And as far as the first question is concerned, that what the diaspora people are doing other than the material support, Ambedkar King Study Circle with a couple of other close to a dozen organizations, where most of them in the call, that we are organizing the lecture series on the agrarian farm laws. That's what's actually happening and what are the misinformation, what this actually law does. Then through that, we are mobilizing the people. And so far, that 5 lecture series are completed, and most of them are yet to come. Many of them are yet to come. So in that, we invited people, those who are directly involved and leading in the movement, including the Vijay Krishnan, who was the Joint Secretary of All India Kisan Sabha, and many more leaders and academics, including Vikas from GNU. As far as the second question is concerned, which is the broader one, the response of the diaspora in addressing the sentiments of plurality and the image of India, that is a reality that we are handling it very carefully without involving in other separatist groups also. So many people pointed out so many mobilizations and the issues that happen around it. What we have, the Ambedkar King Study Circle have seen, there was a very increase in assault on the human rights after the BJP government came to the power, where the Rohit Vemula's, some of the big mobilization happened on Rohit Vemula's suicide, the institutional murder, and second is the Una flog, then the Article 370 and 35A on Kashmir and the CAA, and we have seen some sort of mobilization around when it happened for the other minor incidents, but these are the one major. And another one was the Bhima Gorigan arrest. That when the Bhima Gorigan arrest happened, that people around all the progressive organizations in America have come together. And beside that, what AKC sense that there is a caste being covertly practiced among the so-called upper caste people in America, but they are able to conveniently hide it because of their political monopoly or the material political economical monopolization in American society. So AKC tried to expose that also, and wonderfully and amazingly, when AKC take up the caste issues, why I mentioned the caste issue is so far the so-called upper caste people, those who are the voice of the Indians in America, try to hide it. But when the AKC take it up, many organizations, those who are the progressive like GPA, Boston Coalition, and the Leaders for Human Rights, and many other organizations, they come and join us. And our position was confirmed or manifested when the Cisco caste discrimination case come. And that one, we are seeing a clear, not only the contradiction between the interest group reflecting the interest of the Hindutva and the section of people, those who are representing the plural nature of India. That one was culminated in a couple of years ago when the Hindu American Organization Conference happened in Chicago, where it was challenged openly, which has gotten attention of many American politicians, including a congressman. So that the Hindutva is not Hinduism, but the political project of a certain section of the Hindu right-wing groups in America. And as far as the Congress, how the Congress and the politicians in America are sensitized on this issue, so I would like to mention the Tulsi Gabbard issue. So when the Tulsi Gabbard openly had a meeting with Modi, that she was pretty much exposed among the Democrats. So there it is going now. So now it is very clear that India is a plural society for which the very progressive Indians are standing, and the people, those who are so far so vocal about the Hindutva politics, now they are become defensive. I would like to mention only one thing, last thing, about the image of a nation. So that's again a very mythical one. The image of a nation is how the people of that country, irrespective of race and caste, is treated. I would like to mention one example which happened during the Johnson's administration when Nehru was India's prime minister. So the Johnson administration was talking about civil rights and very boastful about what they were doing for the blacks. But what they did, they tried to dismantle the black community who who are able to own houses whose members were served in the military. So the black people earn some money from the military service and they are able to buy houses, where the houses mortgages were predominantly confined to the whites, but the lower interest, and the blacks were not given such a mortgage, such a loans. And the Johnson administration tried to dismantle even that such a home ownership, because through the home ownership, the 1930s American generation increased their family wealth. Then the Johnson went to India as an official visit. So in the NAACP chapter of a particular city, they sent a telegram to Jawaharlal Nehru saying that Johnson is talking about alleviation of poverty in India, but he is throttling their own people and squeezing and not allowing them to come out of poverty. And they are trying to dismantle the most oppressed racial people in America through their housing program. So what the NAACP thought that Nehru may not convey this to Johnson, but Nehru did it. Nehru conveyed to Johnson, and Johnson immediately when he came back, he reached his housing secretary and asked him to take a matter very seriously, and he did not dismantle the community. So there is what we like to say, there is nothing about India's image is being infringed or damaged. Only by upholding the human rights that all these values will be really upheld. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Karthik, for that elaborate response. Just as a quick reminder, we should be ending this press conference in the next 15 minutes. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I will be taking the hands that we have, starting with Jay Enner at this point. Jay, please unmute yourself, and if you'd like us to see your self.
Yeah, I've unmuted myself. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, just a quick question. I appreciate we are short of time. I mean, so far the debate, particularly in India, has been almost entirely one of taking sides without offering any reasons or any reason, logic, or argument. I suppose the sort of primary sin was on the part of the government for not having done what any good democratic government would do when it wants to introduce a reform, which is to set out the case for the reform, do a detailed analysis, produce a white paper, and set out the case, and then encourage the debate to take place, consider options, do an impact analysis, both economic as well as who are the losers, who are the winners. The fact is that we do need agricultural reform. The trouble with any reform is that there will be losers and winners. And the trick of government, of good policy making, is to make sure that you have 80% winners and 20% losers. And even then, compensate the losers by giving them something in return and set out a roadmap for the reform. None of that has happened in India at the moment. All the debate is about, are you on that side or this side, and name calling and criticizing people and ascribing motives to people and impugning their intention and questioning their loyalty to the country. Now that is no way to go forward. But as the sort of diaspora and as people interested in the subject, I just wonder what can we do to help that cause of doing something like, for example, producing a roadmap, a vision for the future, and setting out a clear strategy, which is what many of us might have done, both in academia as well as in my case in the civil service, where setting out the case for reform is the first step towards embarking on reform, rather than jumping in with the bills and then having everybody polarized on the two sides of the debate.
Right. I think that's, if I'll take this very briefly here. I think the key point is that what one of our group has been saying, and many other experts have said, is that one, the process has not been followed accurately to bring this laws reforms, and there's agricultural reforms has been needed for decades now, and we all understand that. Even Congress was trying to do it at the time. The point is that the Swaminathan report that people have also talked about, that how that report, which was the expert feedback and a very detailed report on different perspectives as it relates to the farmers' laws, as it relates to the agriculture, to the environment, to the climate. But none of those reports which were produced by the experts in the field have also been taken into concert. And in the contrary, we have obviously heard a counter narrative from the government, which doesn't really sit well in terms of the accuracy of it. So you're absolutely right. I mean, there has to be more intellectually driven discourse on that, and that is what one of our demands is, that that people should sit together, the government should sit together with people on the other side, and then come up with a resolution or come up with the consensus building to bring a reform which is going to be suited to the population in question here. That's my little one take here, and if somebody else wants to chime in at this point. All right, seeing none here, I hope that addressed some part of Jay's question, and I totally agree with his comment there. I do like to recognize next Arka Bhattacharya. They've also had their hand up for a while.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Good evening and good morning, everyone. So my question is...
please recognize yourself.
Yes, I'm Arka Bhattacharya calling up from Detroit, United States.
Okay.
My quick question is, we are all aware of HSS, which is the international wing of RSS. And HSS has been instrumental in funding anti-minority hate and discrimination policies in India. So being expatriates here in the West and elsewhere, how can we increase the awareness of the perils of HSS in the Western political circles?
Okay. All right. Let's see who wants to answer that question. Do we have any volunteers for the question? Do you mind repeating your question again, Arka, here, briefly?
Yeah. So my question is, HSS being a primary sponsor of funding for anti-minority discrimination and hate in India, how do we increase the awareness of the perils of HSS in Western political circles?
Okay. All right. Well, one is that these coalitions, these coalitions, that there is this counter narrative voice that exists, right, which is a very progressive voice, so that's one way that we have tried to do our part. And I'll ask my other friends to chime in there. Deepak, are you raising your hand to answer that?
Yes, yes.
Okay, please go ahead.
I can tell you what we have done in Australia. We, whenever an activity of concern happens involving any of the Sangh or related organizations, we raise those issues. Recently, Indian cricket team came to Australia to play the series, one-day T20 and Test match series. In the first one-day international at the Sydney Cricket Ground, an RSS flag went up in the stands. We raised that issue immediately because the next one-day international was also going to be held in Sydney 2 days or 3 days later, and there was a weekend in between. There was no time to raise it through official channels, so we used social media, Twitter, to raise the issue, made sure that the police, the authorities, the state government and the federal government and other states and other state cricket organizations were made aware of who RSS is, who the Sangh organizations are. So as a result of that, we would like to believe it was effective, because in the next one-day international at Sydney, the flag did come up for about 10-15 seconds, and then it was never seen again. So that's one example. The other example of how, I could go on for some time. Recently, the High Commissioner of Australia to India visited, that was in November, visited the RSS headquarters. We wrote a letter to the Prime Minister and made him aware of who RSS is. And there was also a call for the High Commissioner to resign. It got plenty of coverage in the local media. So these are the little things we are doing. There is also a Parliamentary Joint Committee on Security inquiry on extremist organizations in Australia, and we are preparing a submission which makes a case for declaring Sangh as an extremist organization. So these are some examples of what is happening here.
Well, thanks. Thanks, Deepak, and thanks, Arka, for that question. And these are the issues that we all have dealt with. But I'm being nudged here that we should try to stay focused on the farmers issue, which is what today we have assembled on that discussion. So if you have questions, then please try to stay close to the farmers issue. I know everything is intertwined. There's no question about that. But let's try to steer a little bit more focused on the farmers here and our solidarity with them. I have next, Bobby Kohli has raised his hand next. And thank you for everyone's participation and understanding.
Thank you, Manish, and thank you all who have spoken and raised your solidarity and support for the farmers. I would like to congratulate each one of you. So this is not a question, but just a comment on a few things. And I wanted to voice my 2 cents as an Indo-Canadian, as well as a staunch secular and very proud Indian. So I want to say that the whole actions of the government, they have shaken up the pillars on which India stands. The foundation of India and the people of India, they stand for secularism, and the basic tenets of our constitution are the for the people, by the people, and to the people. And that is all lost since this government came into power, and their repeated actions, they have shaken those pillars and they have cut those pillars, and the freedom of speech especially. And even before the independence of India, the biggest pillar which India stands for is humanity. And that has all been lost by the actions of this government. So, and regarding the question of the support of many of the Sikhs for separatism, so I would say that whenever you see a Khalistani flag, it is not per se, from my understanding of being a Sikh and being to various gurdwaras, I would say it is more of a voice of dissent that successive governments, whether it has been Congress or BJP governments, they have done nothing to give any justice to those Sikhs who have suffered since what the actions went since 1980s, 84 especially, what happened to Sikhs. So it is not that they want to separate out, but it is just a voice of discontent. So it should be seen as a discontent that there has been lack of justice for the Sikhs that who have suffered over those years. That's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bobby, Mr. Kohli, for that comment. Couldn't agree more with that. Let's see here. We are almost to the last 7 minutes of this press conference. Are there any more questions? I do see some hands. I'm not sure if they're from the previous attempts, because unless you forgot to lower your hand will still be there. Let's see.
Manish, I want to go back to a question by Kalol. If we have a minute.
Okay, Rohit, go ahead, please.
Yeah. So basically, the question that was asked was, how's India viewed? And I just wanted to add that I think the diaspora itself is an ambassador of the country. And we are far more diffused than the embassy structure, the officialdom per se. And when the outside world looks at India, they look at the diaspora as part of the larger whole. So I just want to reassure our friends back home and in the press that when the diaspora raises its concern about a certain happening in India, it's not from the intention of putting India in a negative light, but it's also its action itself, driven by a certain moral perspective, showcase to the world this heterogeneity and this diversity of opinion that a vibrant, democratic ethos should have, and it does have, because that's who we see ourselves a part of. So I don't think that people who feel that activism is basically shining a negative light on India is what we do. What we do is to basically mix, put our messages into the mix so that people can see that this is the Indian democratic ethos that the founders had envisioned. And I think it's a success story that the Indian diaspora is one of the most active diasporas in the world. It is diffused, it is committed, and thankfully now it's becoming a little more coherent. And I just wanted to make sure that we didn't convey this permanently agitational image that may be built up by some media outlets and some back home as us just being out there to show what's missing in India. We are our consciences, our moral clarity, our moral compass comes from that same democratic ethos that India is built on. So I just wanted to stop there.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you for that again, Rohit. Any other questions we have at this point? I would urge our fellow co-sponsors and organizers for this press conference to put into the chat window their Twitter handles or their Facebook handles that they would like people to be aware of, so they can follow their work more closely. And while they do that, this is a last call for any other questions or comments here. Jay, I do see your hand up. I'm not sure if it's from the previous or you have a new question.
Not a new question so much as just a quick comment, if I may. The idea that was just the last presented is perfectly valid in my view, because the idea that things that we say or tweet about in the West and so on is going to put India in a bad light is complete nonsense, because it pretends as if the foreign embassies in India are not feeding back to their governments back in, say, in Washington or Canberra or Toronto or London or whatever, the facts that are going on. I remember when Trump came visiting over here, there were many Americans who in this country who were actually ashamed. Trump didn't need any further defaming. Trump's news travels fast, to go back to the Trump analogy that we started off with. And likewise, when the Indian Prime Minister travels abroad, he brings with him, in advance of his visit itself, newspaper articles, editorials appear and so on, which tell the local people, the local businessmen and so on, what exactly is going on. And therefore, it's nothing new. It's just another tactic of the right wing in India to shut people up by saying you are defaming India. Far from it. Far from it.
No, I think that is absolutely true. I think one thing that we have always spoken about is that as Indians, we do tend to get defensive about it, right? So just because now people are talking about the bad policies, people have to start looking at it from a very objective viewpoint, that this is not about being anti-BJP, this is not about being anti-Modi, this is about pro-farmers and pro-people, whether it was for CAA, whether it is for the issue that we have had at this point. And like somebody said, that the governments right from the decades, they have depended on the NRI global diaspora base. The fact that Prime Minister Modi came to speak at the Madison Square for the first time, the second time he came to speak at the Howdy Modi, that spoke about the dependency of the Indian American audience, whether it's about the trade, the revenue, or the back home transfers people do, whatever, however people invest. There is a symbiotic relationship in the two groups here. So this group that we have put together, it's not an anti-India group. It is very much a pro-India group. It is very much a pro-people's group at the end of the day. And we obviously we all we can hope is that the government and all the voices, the political voices, views us as such. So that's my little representation, and I hope I'm able to speak on behalf of the entire coalition here that we put together. All right. Any other questions? I guess since no more questions, and it's almost about, and Friends of India has a thing to say. Would you like Friends of India? All right. I'll just repeat their comment in the chat window. They say, we are all working to salvage democracy and people's rights in India, and couldn't have said that better. All right. At this point, we will formally ask for the motion to adjourn this press conference. And we thank you again. The work is being uploaded on Facebook pages that you see on chat window. People have shared of different groups, so please do follow that. And if there are any comments or any concerns, you can always email us back. Again, the email is also included in the chat window of each group here. And at this point, I'd like to once again just formally thank all the friends here from INSAF, from Hindus for Human Rights, from Boston South Asian Council Coalition, the Humanism Project from Australia, Young India, Coalition Against Fascism in India, Ambedkar Study King Circle Foundation, the London Story, Friends of India Texas, Voices Against Fascism in India, Student Against Hindutva Ideology, Global Indian Progressive Alliance, and also the South Asian Solidarity Group, which I forgot to mention that. I beg your pardon on that. With that said, thank you again. You guys all have a great weekend. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll be in touch for our next press conferences or next work. So thank you. Have a good rest of the day. Bye. And I'm asking the hosts to stay back if they will. So.
Manish, can we just stop the live maybe?
Yes, I did that. I stopped the recording on the Zoom. So
No, I'm saying the Facebook live.
is it still going live there?
Yes.
Okay, let's see. Okay, it's still how do I turn this off?
Let's end this, Manish.
All right, so I've paused it. So
Yeah.
I have paused the video. Can you see at your end?
It is still showing live on Facebook and here. Let me see the
Right.
actual page.
Okay. Meena Thana said still live. Okay.
Dara.
Okay, I am trying to see how to turn this live video off. I paused it, but should I just
Able to-
close?
Wait a minute.
Yes. So okay, hold